Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Molly Dacey, and for this episode, I'd like to welcome Jyoti Banerjee. Jyoti is a co-founder of North Star Transition, with a mission to develop approaches to address systemic challenges through radical reframing and holistic collaboration. The main vehicle for change is a transition lab. The goal of a transition lab is to bring together unlikely allies from different disciplines and cultures to reframe problems, identify obstacles of change, co-learn and create novel co-creative solutions. There are currently transition labs running in Wales and Scotland. Thank you so much for joining us. So to begin, if it's okay with you, I'd like to ask you some quick fire questions just so our listeners can get to know you a little bit better.
All right, thank you.
So what was the last book that you read?
The last book, I just finished a book called 5 Times Faster, which is a really interesting book about the carbon and climate emergency that we're facing. And it's basically, the thesis of the book is we're just going too slowly and we're going to be done for and we need to go 5 times faster. Yeah. So there you are.
Good to know. What was the last thing that you learned?
The last thing I learned, meaning just as recently as now.
Just as recently, it could be something tiny, it could be something huge.
Okay, so this morning I was actually attending the Academy Wales summer school session just to sit in and listen in. And the person who was giving a talk asked, what are you doing on a daily basis to promote your mental health? And I thought, what an interesting question. Yeah. You know, I'm not sure I can tell you what I'm doing to promote my mental health. I can tell you what I'm doing to promote my physical well-being, but that's because I had a major health issue 6 years ago and I was challenged to do something on a regular basis. So I can now tell you I'm doing 3 times as much as the doctors said I needed to do in terms of my physical exercise every day. But on mental health, I'm not sure what I can tell you. I know that I do things like listening to music, or I read a bit of the Bible every day. Yeah. But I don't know that I could say I'm doing that for my mental health. It probably helps, but there you go.
Yeah, that's a good one to reflect on, isn't it? What is your greatest strength?
Oh my goodness, I think that would be for other people to talk about. I guess what would be my strength? Perhaps the thing I'm focused on doing is to take really complex things and simplify them. Yeah. So that other people can see them in the same way as I do, because I don't know the complexity. I don't understand it. I'm not a geographer to know how the geography stuff works, and I'm not a biologist. So I've got to find a way to understand from my perspective, how does the world work? And then I find other people think that might be helpful for them too.
That's brilliant. What motivates you?
I guess impact really does. Yeah. What creates impact? How can you drive change and large-scale change? It's not good enough to just have small-scale change. And so that's what really motivates me.
And just lastly on these ones, what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I guess one way of saying that is that I have a profession, and I think that would be a difficult thing to say. I've had a number of things that I've done in my life. So I've been a photographer, I've been a tech entrepreneur, I've been an impact investor, and I've enjoyed all of those things. And I guess if there's one thing I would love to do, what would that be? I wish I would be a musician. That would be great.
Yeah, we get that quite a lot. And typically when I ask the question, it's something completely different to what their profession normally is. It's something that, how sometimes when you ask a child what they want to be, and it's like an astronaut or something like that.
Fireman.
It's usually something like that. But a musician is a good one, I think. Okay. Thank you for answering those. It's really interesting just to get to know you a bit personally. I do have a few more of them, but we'll come back to them at the end. You've said that you seek to accelerate systemic change, and the conditions to establish change include co-creation and collaboration, which is the theme for our episode. So how do you see collaboration contributing to effective leadership?
Well, let's ask the question, why do we need systemic change in the first place? We live in a system. Whether we think about it or not, we have a system that functions the way it does. The fact that we can go to work every day, or we can go and buy some food, or we can live in a house which has a roof, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or even if those conditions aren't true, that's the system we live in. And the system we live in has some positive outcomes, like we can feed, mostly billions of people around the world and so on. But it also has some really negative outcomes. So right now, we have a climate emergency that is hitting us. And it's a direct outworking of the system that we live in. And we have a biodiversity emergency, because even during my lifetime, we have lost a quarter of all living species on planet Earth. So we have a crisis happening there. We have an inequalities crisis, because from the top of the Welsh valleys to the bottom of the valleys, there's a 20-year life expectancy gap. That is horrendous.
Yeah.
And it is the outcome of the system we live in. So my basic proposition is this system doesn't work.
Yeah.
We need it to change. But it can't change because somebody from somewhere says, oh, I've got a brilliant idea about how the system needs to change. And then they push their idea through. Because what we have seen is every time someone has a brilliant idea from one corner of the system, let's say you're someone who loves nature, and you think the best thing for the planet would be to do some real radical rewilding of Wales. Well, that's great. But the farmers may object, or the industrialists may object. And your idea, no matter how brilliant, isn't going to be the right idea. So our view is, if we want to see massive, large-scale change, we actually need to bring the people who live in different parts of the system together to a place where we can begin to imagine together, what would this Wales look like that we'd like to live in?
Yeah. Amazing. Collaboration supports leadership and is needed for an organisation to flourish. So with that in mind, how can leaders create a culture that supports teams to co-create and collaborate?
Well, the funny thing is we actually celebrate leaders who are known for making their decisions, and their brave decisions and their big decisions. And when they go well, that's great.
Yeah.
And then what we don't seem to notice very much, or we harangue them, is the leaders who made poor decisions. But actually the challenge, as far as I can see, is that when you're tackling the sort of problems we're facing today, we don't need an engineer's answer to the problem, otherwise we go hire an engineer. We don't need a doctor's answer to the problem, otherwise we need to find a doctor. What we need is to be able to bring these multiple disciplines, multiple sets of experience all into the same place, and to find a way to allow all of that experience, all of those skills and professional expertise to be melded together.
Yeah.
And that is a collaboration exercise. And for me, at the heart of collaboration is to get people into a place where they actually have empathy for each other.
Yeah.
If you and I are going to collaborate on something, and I actually couldn't care less what you were thinking, it ain't going to go anywhere, will it? And if you didn't have any respect at all for what I thought or why I want to do the same things I'm going to continue doing, again, we've got no future.
Yeah.
So I think one of the key leadership skills in the 21st century is, how do we help multiple disconnected people to collaborate together, and how do we build a sense of empathy between them so that they can actually do some really good work together?
That's brilliant, and it comes in really well to my next question when we talked about empathy. How do you see health and well-being practices as contributors to individual or team or even organisational success?
I guess, for long, health and well-being has just been a kind of optional extra. It's the problem of the health people. It's the NHS's issue. It's not our issue if we're outside the medical profession. But then what we've discovered is that the health and well-being of people actually makes a huge impact on how they live, how they work. I've already mentioned the fact that you've got a 20-year gap in life expectancy between the top of the valleys and the bottom of the valleys. Well, how does that happen? It happens because people who are often in poverty situations eat badly. They make choices that are not so good for their well-being because they might be desperate about something else. They make choices about living far away from the kind of help and healthcare that they might need, not because they want to live far away from the healthcare, but because maybe they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
So what we find is that health and well-being issues impact how we work, how we think, the lives we have, the relationships we have. And so, in a sense, the drive towards well-being is really positive, because it feels to me like it's not an opposite, but it's a different direction from the drive we've had for the whole of the 20th century, which is how do we grow more? How do we be more productive? Regardless of the cost of what it has taken to grow more, because we've grown faster because we've exploited people more. We've grown faster because we've exploited our environment and nature more. We've grown faster because we've polluted freely with abandon and disregard. Well, if we wanted a well-being oriented world, what would that look like? Well, we probably wouldn't be exploitative. We probably would have a different focus from being extractive, etc. So it feels to me like a really positive direction.
You just touched on well-being, and we had talked about other climate crises and biodiversity loss. So how would you like to see leaders responding to these global challenges at their local level?
I'm not sure that climate gives us the freedom to say, I'm operating at a local level and climate is a global problem, so I don't need to worry about it. Whatever we may think about climate not being part of our problem, it's now part of our problem.
Yeah.
Because if we have excess heating in our urban environments and people can't work properly, well, it's a climate impact that we're feeling. Maybe it's not such a serious impact as if our houses get flooded or if the sea, rises and takes away our land. But these are real world challenges. Plus, we have other climate challenges, like the fact that we can't have food being grown properly anymore. I remember seeing a study from UCL on the fact that for every 1 degree of rise in temperature, we're going to have 1 billion refugees because they can no longer live in the lands that they live in. So when we look at these small boats pouring across the Mediterranean, when we look at refugees pouring across America's, big wall that they've built, how high does the wall have to be for someone who's so desperate that they're willing to risk their lives and their families to get away from the situation that they're in, which is they can't live in those places? We have generated that situation. So I don't see us as saying, in my little area, I don't have to think about climate. Everything we do at the moment is facilitating and enabling a system that is destroying our climate. And so we got to ask the question, so what is my contribution to how that system works? And what am I going to do differently?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And it's a question we can all ask ourselves personally as well, isn't it? It's not just about leadership, it's what can I do?
But I think leadership is important because people could say, so what am I going to do? Okay, I'm not going to eat meat because, cows are a big contributor to the climate challenge. So that's one answer. And it'll take us so far, but not far enough. The the actions of individuals is okay, but when we really have impact is when we align together and we do stuff together. So I think there is a leadership opportunity, not just in our companies, but in our society, to think about what is it that we want to do together that'll make a difference. If I decide I'm not going to buy Nike shoes, does Nike care? No. But if all my friends and all their friends and their friends' friends all decide we're not going to buy Nike shoes, and I'm just picking an example out of the top of my head, but if we all decided, Nike has to care. And so it's the collaborative action that I think is going to be at the heart of the real impact we can have.
Just lastly, is what advice do you have for future leaders on how to focus on collaboration and co-creation?
I think one of the challenges in collaboration is that people might think, well, I brought everybody together and we've all had a good chat, now we go home. Well, that's great. It's the first step of a very long ladder. If we want to do something together that is going to be transformative, then we have to ask the question, so now that we know each other, what happens next? As we get to know each other, can we imagine together what is this world we'd like to live in? Once you imagine together, then you've got to ask the question, well, we don't live in that world. What are the changes we're going to have to bring about to enable us to get there? And then when you say, well, these are the changes we need, then you've got to be honest about where are the resources that are going to come up to make this happen. And if you say, where are the resources going to come, then you've got to ask the question, how will we make sure we're delivering on the stuff we want to do? So, step by step by step, just saying glibly, let's collaborate is not enough. We got to have some real meat behind that. And to me, the actions of co-production, co-creation, involve all these sort of things that allow us to move from just talking to doing.
Thank you so much for all the stories and ideas and advice. Just before we end, I'd like to ask a few more quick fire questions, if that's okay. Do you or have you ever played a musical instrument? And this is kind of important if you want to be a musician. So.
I would say I have played at least 2 instruments, but I've got a son, for example, who's doing a master's in piano at the Royal Northern College of Music. So when I see him play and I think, do I play? I don't really play. I kind of mess around.
When you compare, it is quite difficult. What is your favourite type of food?
Oh, well, I'll put aside Indian food because I'm from India and I think Indian food is the best food. But if I had to choose a food that's not Indian food, then what would I choose?
You can't choose Indian food.
Okay, so I'm going to choose Indian food. But if Indian was not on the menu, I would go for Thai.
Thai food, oh, amazing. That's always the question I'm most excited to ask because I feel like it just tells a lot about a person. What is your favourite noise?
Music. I love listening to music. I listen to music pretty much every single day. And
these answers are all pointing in the direction that you should be a musician.
No. I know for sure I shouldn't be a musician. Someone needs to sit and listen and appreciate the music that all the wonderful musicians are doing. I wish I could play an instrument like that, but I'm very happy just being a listener.
Are you more of a morning person or a night owl?
Oh, I wake up, around 5 o'clock every morning, and I'm ready to go. From the moment I wake up, I'm done. So
that's a skill in itself.
I don't know if it's a skill. I think my wife thinks it's a real problem. She's more of a night person.
Lastly, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
One superpower. I'd like to be able to take 5 loaves and 2 fish and feed 5,000 people.
That's a brilliant.
Because that is, I just think of, how did Jesus do that? I wish I could do that. And I know It's not a trivial thing, and it'll never happen for me. But that's my superpower. There you go.
Great.
Feed 5,000 people.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for joining us again. I hope you've enjoyed the experience as much as I have.
I certainly have. Thank you very much, Molly.
Mae un podlediad sgyrsiau ar arweinyddiaeth ar gael trwy ein gwefan. Mae'r hawlfraint y podlediad yma yn cael ei gadw gan Llywodraeth Cymru. Our Conversations on Leadership podcast is available through our website. Copyright of this podcast is held by the Welsh Government.